Welcome back, Mets fans, to another week of Raise the Apple. We have a lot to catch up on, so let's jump right into it. The Mets sweep the Angels and are off today before they head out west to battle the Giants and the Padres before returning home to face the Giants again. So 6 of their next 9 games against the San Francisco Giants. This is a big stretch for the Mets. These 9 games, the Giants and Padres are both within 3 games, I believe it is, of the wild card race. The Mets did move into first place because of the Phillies' loss last night, but it has been a roller coaster up and down last week or so for the Mets. So coming out of the All-Star break, Mets hosted the Reds, where they salvaged the final game of the series after losing the first 2, and then they go and sweep the Angels. We had David Wright Day thrown in there, which we'll talk about that in a second, but it was a very interesting week, to say the least. The bullpen and imploding and offense not producing. Lindor was 0 for 30 and Soto and Pete weren't hitting, and everything just was a fiasco the first couple games out of the stretch. And every single time the Mets go on these little stretches where they suck, the Phillies also suck. The Mets have given the Phillies so many opportunities just to take off in the division, and the Phillies just haven't yet. So that's got to be good to have in the Mets' back pocket. But we're going to try and keep it mostly positive, talk about David Wright Day, and then some comments Chase Utley made before I realized we didn't do an episode last week. So we'll do a very brief All-Star Game Home Run Derby recap, and then kind of one final send-off into the trade deadline, as this time, at the time I'm recording, literally next week is the trade deadline, and this team could look a lot different. It could look pretty much the same. The next week is going to be a roller coaster for baseball fans of all teams. That we're officially in Hug Watch season. But let's start with David Wright Day. Saturday, I was at the game. Mets retired David Wright, put him in the Mets Hall of Fame. That was one of the best experiences of my life. Now, I don't care how cheesy or cringy that sounds. Watching the guy that I grew up watching get inducted in the Hall of Fame, get his number retired, I think it was a little overdue. I thought the ceremony was great. I think the guests he had Howard Johnson, Kadire was there, Willie Randolph was there, Jose Reyes and Daniel Murphy, who I honestly think got bigger ovations than David Wright did, and so many others. It was just a great experience. And in general, I got to meet Frank the Tank, which was a very unexpected surprise. I was with my parents and we were walking. So outside of the stadium, they had like a little block party thing going on. So me and my parents were walking around, and then we get towards the front of the stadium where the Jackie Robinson Rotunda is, and we're approaching the Apple, and I just see Frank walk by, and I did get a picture with him, and nothing was said. I didn't say anything to provoke him. He starts walking away, and then he just turns and looks at me and starts screaming, and was just like, "Oh, Clay Holmes is going to throw 4 perfect innings, and then Dickie Lovelady, the porn star, is going to come in and blow the game open." And it was my dad asked me after, he's like, "What'd you say to him?" I was like, "Nothing." I literally said nothing. It was just an unprovoked Frank the Tank rant. And I found him during the game, because Frank the Tank, as always, made headlines again after that game, because where the third base dugout is in the stadium, on the end of it, there's like a little tunnel. That's where David Wright came out of when he came out on the field before he went over to third base. And Frank the Tank was right on the end seat, and David Wright gave Frank a fist bump on his way out. And there was a video that was going on Twitter. You could hear Frank the Tank screaming and doing his rant from the 300 level. I was sitting in the 500 level, on like right above the foul pole in left field. So if you go to the left field foul pole, literally go straight up into the 500 level. That's where I was sitting, and I could hear Frank from up there. I found him on accident, and I saw him flailing his arms. I could hear him screaming. And here's what I'll say about Frank the Tank. Because a lot of people hate him because of his negativity. A lot of people find his videos funny. I find his videos funny just from, I don't pay attention to what he's saying. Just him ranting the way he does, I think is funny. I don't pay attention though to what he's saying because like Dickie Lovelady wasn't even on the team and he was ranting about him blowing the game. So there's obviously not always a ton of validity into what he is saying, but I get why people don't like him. I don't. Some people are calling for Steve Cohen to ban him from the stadium. That's never going to happen. I don't know why he would do that, but that's just, Frank is definitely, if you ever have the opportunity to meet him, he is definitely an interesting individual to watch in action. But David Wright Day in general was awesome. The Mets honored him in the most Mets way possible with an ugly loss. They almost came back at the end. I really thought Juan Soto tied it. It was just inches from being fair. I know he got screwed over on a couple called strikes, and that check swing at the end, I personally didn't think he went. Check swings and balks are the two things that are the death of me in baseball. Figuring out what a balk is and figuring out on check swings if they went or not. It didn't look like from where, I know I was way high up, but it did not look like from where I was sitting that he went. And then watching the replay on Twitter, I kind of stood by it a little bit. I didn't really think he went either, but that's just me. But it was a great experience. The Mets did it perfectly. That place was a zoo. I've only been able to go to, just because of where I live and how far it is, I've only been able to go to a handful of games in my life, but I was there for David Wright's last game, and this was David Wright's last game times like a million. It was a line to get into the store, which in my opinion, Citi Field needs another that size team store somewhere else in the ballpark. I know they have like the main team store, and then they have a bunch of little ones throughout, but to me, I think they could use another one of that size. But I will give the Citi Field staff credit. They did an awesome job of keeping the line moving. It looked like I was having a little panic attack because being in line, getting stuff in this team store, and then waiting in line to pay, I thought I was scared to death I was going to be late for the ceremony. But they did a great job of keeping the line moving, keeping everything going, and all in all, it was just a great experience there. It was chaotic though. It was a zoo in there, but it was still fun time, and it was overdue to see David Wright get his number retired. But it was, for me, for younger generations of Mets fans, it was a nice, heartwarming thing to see him finally get what he deserves, which I wish could say Cooperstown, but I think injuries are going to hurt him. Speaking of Cooperstown, for another individual who made headlines in the Mets world, our good old pal Chase Utley is back. So Chase Utley was on Pardon My Take, which is a Barstool podcast, was asked by one of the hosts who's a Mets fan about the Chase Utley slide. I'm not going to play the whole clip. You can go find it, but generally speaking, he doesn't regret the slide itself. He regrets the outcome of it, which was Ruben Tejada breaking his leg. So I made a video about it on TikTok. I will never forgive Chase Utley. I don't think any Mets fan will, and I frankly don't blame them. I still will stand by this until the day I die. That was a dirty slide from Chase Utley. I know by rule technicality it was a legal slide, but for me personally, it will always be a dirty slide just because of where he started that slide and the way he went down. He didn't want to go in there to break his leg, but he went in there to take him down one way or another and mess up the throw. I don't buy his story for a minute. He was basically doubling down on justifying his slide, which rubbed me the wrong way 10 years later, and you're still justifying that. I will give it to him. I don't think he intended to break his leg, but I do think he intended to go in hard, knock him down, and break up the throw. And it resulted in breaking Ruben Tejada's leg, which eventually ended his career and changed the rules about sliding into bases. So that's pretty much all I have to say on that. I could go on a whole nother rant about that. Again, I know by rules, technically, it was a clean slide, I guess, if you want to call it that. But to me, that will always be a dirty slide and an infamous moment in New York Mets history. But it's New York Mets, so there's always going to be stuff like that that happens. But as we touched on in the start, the Mets will look to keep the momentum going as they're on the West Coast against the Giants and the Padres. The Giants have been struggling offensively, but even though their offense has been struggling, they can pitch. So that'll be a very interesting outcome from that standpoint, considering the Mets offense has struggled a little bit of late, but they've started to come out of it a little bit. Alvarez has come back up, hit the big home run the other day. The one thing that I noticed that I loved was the finale with was it the finale? Or was it Monday's game? I think it was Monday's game. Monday's game against the Angels. The entire lineup, with the exception of Lindor and Soto, was homegrown talent, which I love to see. That means what the Mets are doing is working. I know some of those guys came in before the Cohen, David Stearns, Mendoza regime, but seeing a almost fully homegrown lineup and Mets being in first place was just an awesome thing to see, and I hope the Mets continue to keep building in that direction, even though the trade deadline's coming. So a lot of question marks on what's going to happen there, but I think we're going to have a good trade deadline from a Mets fan perspective. I think we're going to have a good trade deadline. One more thing I just thought of that I wanted to touch on with David Wright Day was Lindor was not named captain. I went into it kind of 50-50 split on it, if he was going to be named captain or not, because it's David Wright's day, but also if you know David Wright, and after watching the Wright Way documentary, which was awesome by the way, you would know that David Wright does not give two craps about that, about having it solely be about him. So I guess I was a little surprised that he didn't pass the torch. I think that would have been really cool, but I'm also wasn't at the same time. That's really all I have to add on that, but that was just a little thing I was expecting and not expecting at the same time. But I mean, Lindor needed to bust out of his 0-for-30, which he finally did in a big way. So I'll take that instead. But it should be it's going to be a good West Coast trip for the Mets after the Giants. Then they got the Padres, who've been a little bit of a disappointment this year, but the Dodgers have been scuffling of late, so the Giants and Padres are certainly making the race interesting on them. So this next week is going to be very crazy for baseball. But before we talked about the trade deadline, let's do a very brief All-Star Game Home Run Derby recap. Home Run Derby, Cal Raleigh is the winner. O'Neal Cruz, Jr. Caminero, in my opinion, stole the show. I mean, but I don't know if it's the format, but we need to fix ESPN covering the Home Run Derby and just baseball in general. But I don't know if it's the format of the Derby or what it is, but watching the Home Run Derby on ESPN was an absolute nightmare. I know a lot of people said it was a lot more enjoyable to watch the StatCast version on ESPN2. I did not. I watched the original one, and I guess maybe I should have watched the StatCast version, but they need to fix the way the cameras work or something. I don't know if it's the format or what it is, but it was just not a pleasurable. Other than that, it was a great Home Run Derby. Outside of the Brent Rooker stuff, which I'm not an expert on StatCast, but there has to be a margin for error somewhere. I mean, if they were off by a foot or less than a foot, like literally inches, just let him have a swing off. I think it would have been so much better, but it is the year of Cal Raleigh in the big dumper, so I'm not really surprised. I thought it was a great derby, though. In general, outside of Jazz Chisholm, 7 of the 8 guys were awesome. The format, they keep changing it. This one I kind of liked. It just was weird following it from the camera angle perspective. But 7 of the 8 guys, the way they performed, it was a great derby. And the All-Star game, in my opinion, was one of the best All-Star games I've seen in my life. It was awesome to finally see them back in their original jerseys. The AL-NL stuff was just stupid. I don't know why we even entertained that to begin with. And the mic'd up players was good, although I didn't like Scooble because I was like, we shouldn't do the pitchers while they're pitching. I like miking up the players for the All-Star game, but we shouldn't do the players while they're pitching. And then Kershaw came in and completely debunked that theory with the suck it big dumper stuff and how hard was that. He was great on the mic. So, and what could have been Kershaw's last All-Star game. So it was nice to send him off with a nice little ovation. And I mean, for me, it was a great All-Star game. That the swing off stuff is awesome. I don't know who in baseball came up with that or where that came to light, but that was an awesome decision. That was honestly probably the best part. I know the lineups were predetermined, but really, Aaron Boone? I mean, the whole world got to see Aaron Boone managing in action. Jonathan Aranda, really? We missed out on Pete. He didn't even get a chance to swing. And Pete Alonso rightfully misses out on being the All-Star Game MVP, which sucks. But what are you going to do on that one? Kyle Schwarber, though, wins the All-Star Game MVP. Kyle Schwarber very quietly, this will be an off-season video, I think. Kyle Schwarber very quietly could potentially put together a very interesting Hall of Fame case. Just throwing that out there. That'll be an off-season discussion, but he very well could be throwing in a very interesting Hall of Fame conversation, depending on how his career shapes out. He'll be a free agent at the end of this year. Philly's dumb if they don't keep him, but we'll see how that pans out. But let's finish up this week's episode, briefly touching on the trade deadline, because a lot can change and a lot can happen between now and next week. Literally 1 week from the time I'm recording this. The Mets, David Stern's press conference with regards to third base, he basically said that they were going to ride the guys they currently have, the baby Mets, with Mauricio, Vientos, Beatty, Acuna. They were going to stick with those guys. If they could get a position player upgrade, they would in center field, but it would have to be a great option. But their primary targets is going to be the bullpen and maybe a starting pitcher, which should not be a shock to anyone. That's what the Mets need. I would love Zach Gallen. I've said that from the start, from a starting rotation standpoint. I don't think Sandy is going to be in the Mets price range, because I don't think the Mets are going to, in 2023 when they traded Scherzer and Verlander and were rebuilding their farm system, they're not going to trade all those guys away. I think from the farm system standpoint, Jet Williams, Carson Bench, Jonah Tong, Noah McLean, Brandon Sproat, maybe Ryan Clifford and Drew Gilbert in there as well. I'm probably missing some off the top of my head. But I think those 5 to 7 guys are untouchable. Frankly. Unless you are getting, like, I know Buxton has a no-trade clause and he's not coming to the Mets. But unless you're getting a guy like Byron Buxton or like a superstar center fielder, I would be okay with giving up those types of guys for. But Sproat, McLean, and Tong especially are the future of this rotation. I would consider them untouchable unless you are getting a superstar in return. Like not a rental like a Cedric Mullins or whoever. I would or Eugenio Suarez, who is destined to be a Yankee apparently if you read social media. But it'll be an interesting trade deadline. I think the Mets are going to make some bullpen upgrades. I know Griffin Jax is a name that's been talked about from the Twins. I know Duran from the Twins has been thrown around, and there's some other guys in there as well. Felix Bautista on the Orioles was a name that I don't think was going to be moved, but was an interesting thought. But now that he's hurt, it's definitely not happening. I don't know, besides a small handful of guys, who's going to be available and at what price for the Mets. Because David Stearns is not really known for making huge, splashy moves as his time in Milwaukee, but he doesn't have the same budget in Queens as he does with the Brewers. So I think that could change a lot of things as well. But for me, I would love Griffin Jax. I think that would be a nice bullpen arm. I also would love adding Duran from the Twins as well. I think both of those would be great rotation or back of the bullpen options. Emmanuel Clase, is a name that's been floated around. Of course, I would love him, but I am scared to see what the Guardians are going to ask for him. That is going to be a very big price tag, as it should be. But I think that the Mets are going to be one of the more interesting teams at the deadline just because are they going all in? Obviously, they're going to be adding and buying. They're not going to be selling. But how all in are they going to go, and what are they going to be willing to part ways with? I think that's going to be the interesting part of how this is navigated. But I think regards to the rest of the league, I think it's going to be a very interesting and very competitive trade deadline. I think some guys are going to get overpaid for. I think the Yankees, personally, I think the Yankees are going to be the team that overpays for everything that they get at the deadline because the American League is so wide open, even though the Astros have gotten it together. But, I mean, I think the Mets and Phillies, I think, are going to be the two teams to watch at the trade deadline because they've been going back and forth in the division. They're going to continue to go back and forth, and they both have some similar holes that I think are going to need to be addressed. They're both going to be competing with each other to fill those holes. So we'll have to see for a week from now. I mean, the big question is the baby Mets. Alvarez doesn't count in this, even though he's considered a baby Met. But Vientos, Beatty, Mauricio, Acuna. Of those four, do all four of them stay at the deadline? That's going to be the question. I think, yes. I think all four of them stay. If any one of the four of them were to go, I think it would be Acuna. Because Beatty has been great. Vientos, we know what we have. It's just not been it's been a textbook definition of a sophomore slump for him. And I still think the team hasn't seen enough of Mauricio to know what they have with him. I think he's still too raw to see what they have with him. So a lot of eyes are going to be on the Mets, on the Phillies, on the Yankees, maybe the Dodgers. It's going to be a very I don't really know what to expect this trade deadline. The Diamondbacks are going to be a team to watch just for who they're willing to sell off. And same with the Guardians, who they're willing to sell off, who they're trying to hold on to. I know Stephen Kwan's been thrown out there as well, but we'll have to wait and see on that. That's going to wrap it up for this week of Raise the Apple. Mets head out west for the final time this year, thank God, because if you live on the East Coast, you know that West Coast games are an absolute nightmare. But it is always a good time watching on the West Coast. What could go wrong? But make sure you subscribe and like. Make sure you follow on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Make sure you follow on TikTok and Twitter at RTA_pod. Thank you for tuning in. It is going to be a very interesting next week with the trade deadline. Episode next week will basically do a recap of the entire deadline of everyone, not just the Mets, but everyone across the league, do winners and losers, that sort of thing. So stay tuned for that. Again, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and let's go Mets.